All right. Great. We are live here. Special guest with us, Lee Barrett and Brian
Hi,
Belletti. How you doing, Lee? Where are you right now? What are you doing?
I'm
Can
I'm in
Lee
Shenzhen,
Brian
and
Belletti? How you doing, Lee?
I'm
Where are you right now?
So
okay. So I'm
Angela
in
does this
Shenzhen,
every time.
and I've been out this afternoon because, as many people may or may not know, it's National Day here, and I went to one of the newest underground stations, metro stations in Shenzhen, which is Gangshan North, and they've got two huge, great big Chinese flags mounted in the station, really, really big, maybe 10 meters by sort of 6 meters. And the amount of people there, like taking photos in that station in front of those flags. And I was walking around, and it's busy. There's just, you know, I just find it incredible the amount of Westerners who say, "Oh, everybody's repressed in China. The government controls everything." There was literally this event going on in this shopping centre there, and it was kind of like flash mob. That there was an announcer going 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, and then just 20 like young people had run out the crowd and start like doing these dance routines, and then theirs had finished, and it go 5, 4, 3, 2, 1 again. Just to see all these young people, they're just like any other young people anywhere else in the world, just enjoying themselves in a Chinese holiday. We went to a restaurant to eat dinner. It's full of families, and it's like just like anywhere you could be in the world. So this myth that so many Westers have entrenched in their head of that, the people are all repressed, and the government controls anything. It's just such a load of baloney. It really is.
Yeah, absolutely. They have just different ways to have fun, to express themselves. Actually, one of the activities I remember in China, uh, uh, they have in nighttime, and we have that also in Hong Kong. It's karaoke in the streets.
Oh
Improvised
yeah.
karaoke in the streets. They have playing chess in the streets. They have actually dancing, group dancing, and you know what?
Hmm.
For us, Westerns, when we look at that, we think, oh, wait, what is it? And so on. But you know what? It's a different way to have fun. But it's a community thing. You see, in the West, and I'm not, it's not about criticizing the West is bad. But Chinese, they have fun in communities, and we tend to be on our own, and we at home, and we, video games, watching porn, football. I don't know. It's not good and bad, but the thing is that it's just different. Is they do things in community, and Westerners, they look at that and they think, oh well, it's a group thing. It's like, are they brainwashed? Are they, there's dancing all together in the streets? It must be like a communist thing that you need to do. We rationalize or lonely behavior type. And you know what? It's not right or wrong, but we just wrong on China because we're making assumptions and we are looking with our Western lenses. Brian, what
Yeah,
do you think?
yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. As an American who at a very young age traveled to Asia, to Japan primarily, when I was in the Marines, you see all of these things in a totally different culture, and your first inclination, especially if you're an American, because you're taught that America is the best, and everyone else, if they're not doing what we're doing, something is wrong with them. But you start to realize that it's just different. It's not, like you say, Angela, it's not better or worse. It's not right or wrong. And then you start to understand what this other culture is doing and why. You start to see the value of it. And then you start to connect it to things that used to be part of Western culture that no longer is, because it was buried under, I would say, contemporary ideas, or I would say actually programming and brainwashing. It's an irony. The West is always projecting onto others what it is actually doing to its own people, or doing to others. It's always this process of projection. I mean, think about it. You turn on the TV as a little kid in the U.S. in the 1980s when I was growing up, and it's GI Joe, and it makes you want to go join the military, right? And so how is
Yeah,
that
yeah.
not brainwashing? Because they didn't tell me they didn't tell me the truth about what was going on. And then when you get older, there's videos tailored to different age groups, movies tailored to different age groups to convince you to go join and serve your country. I think I had watched Saving Private Ryan right before I had joined, and it really pumps you up to go do it. And then you do it, and if you're being objective, you realize, oh my God, I've been completely brainwashed and tricked. A lot of Americans never wake up from that, though, unfortunately.
I had one. I had a friend. Sorry, Angela. I had a friend who lived in China for a while. He's now back in the US. And he actually told me, he says, during his school years, in the classroom, they had pictures of the American military on the classroom walls, and they were sort of taught, oh, this is what we're number one because of our military. And I'm thinking, what a sort of doctrine to pump into people's minds. And if you look at since the end of the Second World War, that's the thing that America used. I mean, I recently uploaded a video on Blinken's speech, but there's a part of that speech where he talks about, countries, we want a world where countries are free to choose their own path and who they want to partner with. And I'm thinking, how can you seriously stand there and say that? Because like for the last umpteen decades, any country that's wanted to take their own path that's not aligned with what America wants, they've literally invaded or overthrown the government or created some coup. And I just find it unbelievable how he can stand there and say that. I mean, does he believe it himself? I really don't know,
This is a good question.
Yeah, it sounds like a self-suggestion. There's a system of self-suggestion. The more you repeat, even lie to yourself, you end up believing it. There's a doctor called Coué, and actually that's what he told his patients. He said, well, just tell yourself all the time, I'm getting better, I'm getting better, I'm getting better. And somehow at some point you're going to believe it and something will happen. And I think this is what they're doing in the West, and especially in the US. And the problem is that, you see, the worst thing is that when you become arrogant and you assume that you are the best, it's you actually improve when you see room for improvement, and you are always doing self-reflection. The problem is that the West is not doing self-reflection. You see, we don't even learn about history. Basically, how do we know, do we improve as a human being? You look at what you did. What did I do last week? And you see some things went well, something went wrong. Things that went wrong, you self-reflect and you say, how can I do better? Well, in the West, we don't look back. How many times you've been wrong? Iraq, Syria, Afghanistan, Vietnam. Einstein used to say, madness is keeping doing the same thing and expecting different results. And that's where we are. I think you have something you want to add. I just want to share.
Yeah. Because we're talking about brainwashing, and someone in the comment section talked about Desert Storm trading cards. And I kid you not, I had all of the collections when I was a little kid growing up. I had all of the collections. I couldn't wait to get another. They came in these big boxes, and then in the boxes were these little packets. And look at the different types of cards. There were different tops, and Pro both had their own different lines. It was totally crazy. And think about that, trading cards for kids over a war of aggression being fought on the other side of the planet. Could you imagine if China was doing that, how the Western media would react, how psychotic they would say it's so psychotic and demented that they're doing this. And yet this is what's been going on. And this is just one of many examples, G.I. Joe, trading cards, many, many other things. It's just one of many. I just thought I would share that.
Guys, I have found a gem. Just get ready. This is Golden Chang on steroids. He's on YouTube. I'm afraid I'm doing some publicity for this guy, but I think people should watch. Get ready. This channel is called China Update. I'm going to read just the titles. China New World Order. Xi Jinping is getting desperate. 51% of mortgages underwater. China's coming lost decades. China 3 billion empty apartments. The end of Chinese economy. China's government plan revealed. China stocks hit new low. Why China's economy is in trouble. Western companies flee China. Official situation is dire. You know what? I am talking about these guys putting videos on a daily basis. There are probably 500 videos. There's not, I say, there's not a single one which is positive. It's just there's so much creativity. You can go back a long, long, long way. Housing dual crisis. Beijing is getting desperate. China hedge funds in trouble. That's what we're going through. I mean, this is
He really likes that picture of himself, though. I'll give him that.
but it's crazy. So
this is
called
sorry,
China Update. Yeah. Please, Lee.
Yeah, I mean, this is one of the things, because these anti-China people, they can make videos, and they can make videos about whatever they want, because it doesn't have to be the truth. Because, you know, actually the bigger the lie, the more views they tend to get, because generally the more extreme the content. Whereas when you're making content here in China that's actually true, you can't think of all these, because you're making content about things that are true. It's not possible to get all these myriad of titles. And I sometimes feel like, you know, you're trying to push a boulder up a mountain because you're swimming against the tide of public opinion in the West, whereas these guys, they're swimming with the tide of public opinion, so they get a huge amount of views. You know, it's like a lot of the anti-China people. You know, the videos are just ridiculous. The stuff they make up, it doesn't matter, because they don't need to tell the truth. They can just make up any old shit and people believe it. You know, and I just look at some of the comments. Like I did this video where I dissected Blinken's speech at the Johns Hopkins University, and the overwhelming comments are fairly supportive, and even there's a lot of people from the US in there saying, look, you know, this doesn't represent us as the regular people. This is the sort of neocon politicians. But even a lot of Americans are like saying, you know, Blinken is just a out and out bullshitter, basically. What can I ask Brian? You're probably in touch with people, I guess, still in the US, like regular people. What's their thought? Do they actually know anything about China?
Well, unfortunately, you have, I think you have a lot of people who don't know and don't care, and then you do have a lot of people kind of conservative, but I wouldn't say too far conservative, but probably Trump supporters who supported Trump because they thought he was going to shake everything up on both sides of the party, which I never believed was going to happen. But these people, I think, wanted to believe because they're frustrated with what's going on in America. They know that it's wrong. They want to see change. They don't understand that it's not going to happen through elections. But anyway, these people tune in to media that is supportive of Trump, and a lot of this media is anti-China, and they'll have the same sort of absolutely absurd nonsense that we were just talking about. I was just going all the way back to a year ago on that channel you just showed, Angelo, and it's the same headlines repeating every 3 or 4 months. Housing crisis collapse in 6 months, and then 6 months later, collapse in 6 months. It's just nonsense. It is pandering to what is a fundamentally racist, hateful population that has been told that, you know, again, that overseas, those people are all backwards and they need us to straighten them out. And China is the worst because it's getting big and powerful, and soon they might start telling us what to do, and we can't let this happen. So this is a huge problem that is getting worse. And again, I want to focus on the racism, and you know, Americans all throughout history, I mean, they had slavery. They were undoubtedly racist. Look at some World War II propaganda about Japan, for example. Just see how racist and unacceptable that would be today. And just look at modern day propaganda against China, how actually racist it is. We're not allowed to be racist against any other group, but it's okay to be racist against Asians in general, and more specifically Chinese, where I think that racism in general is wrong. They make exceptions because the establishment, this is another weird thing that a lot of Americans tell me, Brian, how can America be racist? We're so politically correct about everything. Because the people who are being politically correct in Washington don't actually believe any of this. These are all divide and conquer issues that they mire the American people in. They are racist. They believe they are the best in the world and everyone else is inferior, and that they're wasting, Russia, those Slavs are wasting resources. We should have those resources. The Chinese are just breeding out of control and taking over all of that space, and now they're spreading out from their borders. We should be taking all of that territory and resources. This is what they think, and when they talk, when you understand that, when they talk and they do their speeches, you could hear how they're kind of masking it, but not really.
So Brian, what do you guys think? We have very often these people saying, well, those anti-China saying, well, we love Chinese, but we hate the CCP. Can we explain to them that the CCP, which is in reality is the CPC, that's the real name, what it represents to Chinese, that's China, it's a party that has 90 million members. This is China. So it's just an excuse, right? What do you think, Lee?
Well, I can only go from my own experience. I've been coming to China for 18 years and I've lived here for the last 5. And although I don't speak a great deal of Chinese, there's a plethora of people here that speak excellent English. And there's some very intelligent people. I've had many, many conversations, and it's hard to find Chinese people that are negative towards their government. You'll get the odd one or two have a few maybe issues, and I think they possibly went on a bit too long with COVID. But I think the majority of people, in my experience, I speak to, it's like, well, the people in the government are kind of one, because like you mentioned, they have a huge amount of government members. Almost every family has some relative that is a member of the government. The government and the people are a lot more sort of together here than in Western societies, for sure. I actually believe that, and from what I observe, that the government actually listens to the public opinion more here than it does in the West. For very small things, there's a line here called 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So if you're having some issue with your sort of local sort of council equivalent in the West, because I think another thing a lot of Westerners get wrong, they have this idea that Xi Jinping and the central China government control everything. That's not the case. They set sort of big like foreign policy and that, but a lot of like I'm living here in Shenzhen. A lot of the decisions here in Shenzhen are made by the Shenzhen government. It's not all controlled, and there's areas like Shenzhen is one of them that are kind of allowed to set their own sort of policies based on what that province or city needs. You have provincial governments, and you have like equivalent of what we would have as a council in the UK, which you have like Shenzhen government, which runs Shenzhen. But as I say, I really feel that the people in the government, because a lot of the government members are community people here. So you go to any small village and they will have a village leader who will generally be a member of the Communist Party of China. And he will be that like liaison between the villagers, the normal people, and his like local government. These small villages are not speaking directly to Beijing. There's a whole lot of steps. I find it amazing how these Westerners think Xi Jinping controls everything and he makes all the decisions on his own. I just think it's nuts.
And you know, I looked into it, and you guys can correct me if I'm wrong, but the Chinese people vote at the local level, and then that level votes for the next above them. So technically, everyone in the highest levels of Chinese government, uh, including the president, they have all been voted in by people who, at least indirectly, have been voted in by the general population. So the idea that it's just a dictatorship and President Xi Jinping just declared himself leader for life, this is utterly absurd. It's utterly absurd. And
It's
just
crazy.
Even Wikipedia and look it up. It's people, the ignorance, the ignorance.
There's one thing. Yeah, there's one thing I like very much actually in China is there's this system of surveys. So basically, the government organized tens of thousands of surveys all around China, local government at the national level, and actually, what they're looking for are what are the wishes from the people? What do they need? What would they prefer? So you see, they anticipate. It's not where like politicians in the West, they react to grievances of people. In China, they're anticipating what is the need of people, what do people want, what do people wish. They anticipate that and they implement it. So basically, they're listening to people. And this is an advanced indicator. Those surveys are advanced indicator. What should we do for the next 5-year plan? And I want to add up just to simplify the Chinese system. The Communist Party of China actually has 90 million members, but it's the equivalence of what we have in the West. In the West, we have roughly 3 to 5% of people that are really politicized. I'm talking about, people that go into the streets, hands flyers and so on. And basically, it's the same in China. Whoever is politicized, is interested in politics, get into the Communist Party. Basically, there are requirements, you need to do your homework. You need to be, to have a certain level of consciousness. And then within that, there's a democratic process where you are selected and elected by your peers, but it's a meritocracy system, meaning that if you deliver, you can climb up the ladder of power. So Xi Jinping actually he started at village level. And because every time he was delivering, and he was always elected by his peers. It's what we call meritocracy system. So basically, things that happen in the West, that you have a clown like Zelensky, because he told people what they wanted to hear, and overnight is at the top level, will never happen in China. No way. You have to do your homework and deliver. That's what we call.
I think that's something else in China. When politicians don't perform, they're out. I don't know about the US, but in the UK, politicians can make the most ridiculous wrong decisions and nothing happens. There's no comeback to them. But in China, you've seen some of the things that even now, I think very recently, some fairly high-level politician was found guilty of corruption, and he's out, and he will either get, if it's found to be bad enough, he will be executed. If it's not, he will spend a long time in prison. So it dissuades those people from, doing that. And the second thing I want to say is, by the time politicians in China get to the top level, they've probably served for like 30 years, minimum. So by the time they get to there, and I think this is reflected in, you have like diplomats like Wang Yi and many of the top level diplomats in China. And I would also, extend that to like Lavrov in Russia. They are way, way more strategic. They're way better than any politicians in the West. The politicians in the West, it's all knee-jerk reactions to things. Here, it's so strategic. Like, there's so many Chinese going, oh, why don't we ban Apple because of what they've done to Huawei? But the Chinese know that would be not a sensible move because they'd be shooting themselves in the foot. But the West are shooting themselves in the foot almost every decision they make,
It's worse too.
Yeah.
It's like bigger caliber guns that they use each time they do it too. It's like they're just trying to figure out how to point a deck cannon at their feet. Because I mean, think about what they've done to China and how they've painted themselves into a corner, and how they've given China every excuse it needs to become self-sufficient in terms of chip manufacturing. One of the most complicated things to do in terms of technology on Earth today. And they're giving this massive industrial base the impetus to develop its own chip manufacturing process, basically all in country. Think about what position that puts the West in. If they had just been like you say, Lee, if they were just a little more strategic and not so knee jerk in all of their interactions with China. And they just said, look, we could continue supplying China with all these chips. We'll make a huge amount of money. Even American chip companies are saying, why aren't you letting us continue to do business with China? Now we have less money for R&D, and we're going to end up falling behind. And in Washington, they don't understand it. It's the anti-China segment of Washington and their supporters across the general public. They are their own worst enemies.
Lee, do you want to add up? You've done some homework on the microchips, semiconductors. Can you add up something on what is happening right now when it comes to those new generation? And maybe we might reach a new paradigm where this maybe it might be like a huge leap in terms of technology, right?
Yeah. So what I'm aware of being here, I was aware about 6 months ago that they'd already mastered this 7 nanometer technology. And interestingly, there was one of the top legal guys from TSMC, who's now not with TSMC. He actually came out with a statement, I think earlier this week. He says, I was absolutely sure, confident that China would break 7 nanometers with technology they have, and he's actually convinced that they will move to 5. But really interestingly, I was on a flight about a week ago, 2 weeks ago maybe now, and I was talking to these two guys from Tsinghua University, and they were talking to me that they've developed this new material that's literally 1 atom thick, and they've managed to create this material to the point of it's not yet mass production, but they're very close to it. And I get the sense that there's a lot more going on here than is in the press. I think if you just look back to Huawei, I went to their press conference in March of this year, and when somebody asked the question about 5G, Meng Wanzhou, who is now the I think rotating chairman, she says, it will be very much down to when the US give us a license to produce 5G and sell 5G phones. And I think a lot of the West underestimate Huawei, and I have a lot of contacts within Huawei. I've done a number of projects with them, and they have a huge amount of very, very smart people. You don't even get onto the engineering team in Huawei unless you've got a master's degree. And they have numerous people, hundreds and hundreds of people who have PhDs. And these are not from some backwater university. These are from places like MIT, Tsinghua, Yale, Harvard, all the top universities. And because they have the money to spend to recruit these people, they're paid well. And it just makes me laugh when I hear the West go, Holland have built this machine, this ASML EUV machine, and nobody can do that. Well, it wasn't invented by some mysterious power of God Almighty. It was invented by human beings. And I strongly believe China will get there. And this is the stupidity of the West, because China were more than happy to buy technology from the US, from Holland, from Japan, from anywhere. Why reinvent the wheel? But they've now, like Brian just says, they've been forced to reinvent the wheel. And people say, but they're 3 years behind. This new Huawei chip is 3 years behind the latest technology. Well, maybe it is, But the point is that China have time on their side. You know, they are looking at 8 years, 10 years, 12 years. They're not looking at next year. You know, they'll admit right now the sanctions are a bit of a bump in the road, but they're confident that given the time, they will overcome those sanctions. And then I think the West will realize what a calamitous error they have made.
I just want to add, Lee, you're talking about Tsinghua University. I was just looking at a couple of articles, including from Interesting Engineering, and it's talking about China plans giant particle accelerator powered chip factory. When I first heard that, I thought it sounded insane, but they actually have a particle accelerator in the factory producing the laser that is doing part of this process, and it is at Tsinghua University. So whoever your sources were is pretty close. They are obviously working on a huge project, and it is in the media, at least part of it. This is something that they have been working on for years. And I want to go back to something you just said, Lee, that the machine was not made by some mystical being above humanity, but it was made by white people, Lee, who are superior to the Chinese people in all ways. So there's no way Chinese people could figure out how to do this technology, which again, it is utterly absurd. It all goes back to like literally World War II, and before that, this race intelligence theory that is completely bogus. They honestly, there's people who still believe that living today, even as China has the largest high-speed rail network on Earth, moving billions of people every single year without incident. And then you go to the US and you're on Amtrak and you're just thinking, oh, who can honestly look at Amtrak and the state of America right now and then subscribe to this like race IQ theory? I don't know. It's troubling. It's 2023 and people still think like this.
I mean, I'm constantly impressed by the kind of people. I mean, just the other day I was on a flight. I got off the flight. I needed to transfer. I'm talking to this woman. I'm a physicist at the Academy of Science and Technology in Beijing. Oh, where did you study? Oh, I studied. I got my master's degree at MIT. These are not stupid people. These are extremely smart people. And interestingly, if you look at a lot of like the science and technology people in the US, a lot of them are actually Chinese people. I mean, that is starting to alter now because many of them are actually returning to China, and many students who previously would have earned their qualifications, degrees and masters in America, who would have then stayed on to work for American companies. I think there's a shift now, and this has all been caused by the US because the sanctions from the US have made Chinese people way more patriotic. It's had the opposite effect, really, to what America thought it would have. So it's almost like now you speak to people at Huawei, and they're almost in a fight that they're determined that they will win because their patriotism. It's like, how dare you, push China down? We're not here to be pushed down, and we will triumph. It may take us a few years, but we will triumph. And I think that the West are going to be, once China master that chip technology, I think the West are going to be in deep, deep trouble, because combine that with the ability of China to manufacture and the capacity they can manufacture at. And this brings me back to what I hear Brian on his channel and Alexander Mercouris say all the time, is that, the West massively underestimated Russia's industrial capability. And Russia's industrial capability is a fraction of what China's industrial capability is. So once they master those chips, they will be able to produce those in millions upon millions at a fraction of the price of the West. So you'll have all these foundries in Germany and Japan and America. They'll all be going, well, we don't have any customers to sell our chips to because actually we can buy the same chip from China at like 50% cheaper, And even the CEOs of like NVIDIA and Intel are telling the American administration this, and still they don't want to listen, and I find that just crazy that their attitude is ridiculous.
And Japan and South Korea, they were forced to sign on to the CHIPS Act, and then they were begging Washington, please make this waiver, that waiver, this waiver, because you're going to kill our industry, and China's just going to continue moving on anyway. They did the same thing with the aerospace industry. They saw Russia and China working on their own airliners, and so they decided to go in for the kill. And they're doing the exact same thing to themselves. They're going to end up having Airbus and Boeing excluded from the Chinese airliner market, which has to be the largest or one of the largest in the world, or soon will be the largest in the world if it already isn't. And so China's just going to be filling that huge market with their own aircraft. So what are they thinking? What are they thinking?
Yeah, it's just nuts. I mean, I think I can't remember which airline it is in China, but they've just placed a $10 billion order with Comac, because Comac have developed the C919, and they have a couple flying around now, and that's an order Boeing's not going to get. I don't think Boeing have got any orders for 2 or 3 years. I know Airbus are still getting orders because Comac just can't meet the demand, but I don't see Boeing. So Boeing have lost out massively. They've had billions upon billions of dollars worth of orders. China's fleet is a fairly new fleet, and they keep it as a fairly new fleet. So and I think even Boeing themselves, very recently, within the last couple of weeks, we're talking about how huge the Chinese market is over the next 15, 20 years. And sadly, they'll probably see none of that because of the administration's stupid policies,
Yeah, I think one of the problems we have also is those societies. When I'll take like 3 examples between the West and China. The difference between purpose-driven and profit-driven. So you have the healthcare in China. It's purpose-driven. It's only 6% of GDP. In the US, it's 18% of GDP. While in the US, that's the only country in the world where you have life expectancy which is going lower, meaning that your kids are going to live a shorter life than yours. Then you have education, profit-driven versus purpose-driven. You have a huge loan, and actually the quality of education, it's not there. It's not there. Defense is the same. You spend $1.5 trillion on a plane, F-35. Why? Because you need to enrich the military industrial complex. When in reality, Russia is strong. Why? Because it's purpose driven. This is why they have the capacity now to produce more than Europe and the US combined. And those are the problems. And that's why China, again, China has an education which is very based on science, math, technology, engineering. Well, China, we compete against that. China has 10 times more graduated in those than in the US. Because in the US, actually, I just checked. When you look at the master level and a PhD level, 50% of students are actually foreigners. And half of those foreigners are Chinese. And guess what?
Yeah.
They all go back to China.
They certainly are now. Is that the F-35 you're talking about? Is that the F-35 that's only operational 55% of the time?
No, exactly.
They have to do so much maintenance on it. And cost how many $1 trillion? Some ridiculous, massive amount of money, wasn't it?
And you remember when?
Yeah, Brian.
You remember when the special military operation began in February last year, and they were saying, "Oh, look at Russia! Look how small their defense spending is compared to the U.S. And look at Russia's tiny little GDP. It's smaller than Texas. It's smaller than California. How can they compete? Because as Angelo was just saying, it's all inflated. It's all inflated with corruption and creative accounting, and at the very center of it, the fundamentals are extremely weak in the West, and this is now reflected in the conflict in Ukraine, and it's reflected in this competition, or I would say confrontation between the U.S. and China. I was just thinking about how Boeing and also Airbus are creating the same problem for themselves that the U.S. is creating regarding chip manufacturing. But when you go to the think tanks pushing out this policy, which is then adopted by Washington and promoted by the corporate media across the West, it's Boeing and Airbus who are funding almost all of these think tanks. So and the thing is that the engineers at Airbus and Boeing are obviously, they're real great at their job. They're great engineers. The problem is the people who run the company, who own it, they don't care about manufacturing aircraft. They're investors and board members who are just trying to wring every single penny they can out of this business that just so happens to make aircraft. And the same goes for the auto industry, pharmaceutical industry, healthcare, everything. And so that's why you have these people who are out of touch, because all they do is play games with money, investing. It's all a casino game to them. They don't care about the fundamentals of aerospace engineering or the auto industry. What people need to be healthy. They just care about making money. And so I think everything follows from there. And it's circling the drain. It's unsustainable.
Yeah,
go ahead, Lee.
I think this is one of the things in China. So I'll speak to like family back, and they can't understand how, like, why is electricity and gas and travel so cheap here in China? Well, I try to explain to them, well, it's because that, unlike the UK, where all the energy has been sold off to foreign companies, so like France control a lot of the electricity industry. I think Germany have big stakes in our gas industry. Years ago, when the Conservative government was basically short of money, and they wanted to, oh no, what we can do, we can raise huge amounts of money by privatizing all these industries. So now that the fundamental fact is in England, these companies, it's not about supplying electricity and gas to the people. It's about how much can we make for the shareholders. Well, that will never happen in China, because China would never let those industries go into private ownership, never mind foreign ownership, And I think that's one of the beefs of the USA, because these massive hedge funds and share portfolios can't come into China and buy up like huge parts of their national industries, because they run here not to make profit. They run, if you look at the metro systems, many of them actually lose money. Some of them, their aim is to break even. But the whole concept of trains and underground systems and gas and electricity and water is to supply services to the people, not to make huge amounts of profit for the shareholders. And that's why in countries like this, I can go from one side of Shenzhen to the other for literally $1 on the metro system, a US dollar. I go to the UK, you go one station, costs you more than that. And then you look at electricity, it's probably 5 times, 6 times more expensive in England than it is here. Because you look at this energy crisis in Europe, the UK energy companies have made record profits, but it's all at the expense of the people. And that will, as far as I can see, never happen in China, because their mentality is that this is a service we provide to the people. It's not here to make money, and they won't let foreign investors buy into that. And I think that's a good thing.
Yes. It's interesting, Lee. You know what they call it in the West? They call it liberalization. In reality, just analyze the word itself. Think about it. Liberalization. Inside there is liberty. But what is it? It's selling state-owned assets and strategic. We are talking about electricity. We are talking about transportation. Yeah. We are talking about highways, and those are service, and it belongs to people. So they are selling for a penny, and you end up paying the highway that you finance, while you shouldn't be paying that. It's just absurd. And we call it liberalization. The word itself makes people, people don't realize liberalization. Are you against liberalization? Of course I'm for liberalization. If people only knew what it is behind that, it's just absurd.
Yeah, it is. It's absurd, you know. I mean, I hear the West a lot. They will criticize China's high-speed rail, which is it is a really, really superb network, and it's continuing to expand. And the amount of people it moves around are just phenomenal. But the West gives them, oh, but you know, they'll never regain the capital that they've spent. But they don't look at it like that. They look at it that over the years it will create a huge economy. I've been to villages here. I'll give you one story. I went to a village high up in the mountains in Sichuan province. 5 or 6 years ago, many of the old people in that village were extremely poor, but they had an abundance of cherry trees. But they couldn't do anything. They picked these cherries. What are we going to do with them? And 4 or 5 years ago, China government built a highway that comes within a few miles of the village. So what happens is all the transport companies like Sunfeng and DHL, they all open these little offices just near the village. Now what happens? The local old people, they get up at 6 a.m. They go and pick the cherries off the trees. They put them into 1 kilogram boxes and they sell them all over China because they can access the distribution network. Now, the income of people in that village is 10 to 20 times what it was just 6 or 7 years ago. And that's what this infrastructure does. But you can't measure that. You can't measure that on, oh, it's cost us, 5 million to build this highway. We'll never get the money back, because the money comes back in the economy. And it's part of this poverty alleviation. It's not like, oh, we just give money to these people. One other thing that I see here, like in the UK, right? People get a bit elderly. They maybe can't get a job because they deemed as a bit too old. So the government just pays benefits out. What do they do in China? They employ them in parks, maintaining parks. They employ them in cities, keeping streets clean. It gives them a purpose. And many love what they're doing. You speak to some of these older people who maintain the parks. They're some of the happiest people you speak to in China. It's not hard work. But they enjoy it. And then the government pays them for doing that. It won't be huge salaries, but it's enough for them to live on. And just going on, I'm sorry to rabble, but like the other thing here, I mentioned, this family gets like 60,000 RMB a year who live in the countryside. Straight away, Westerners go, oh, that's not very much, blah, blah. But these people don't need a huge amount of money. They've got a house the government probably gave them 30 or 40 years ago, so they have no mortgage, no rent. Right outside their house, they have a patch of land full of vegetables that they're growing. They nearly all keep chickens. Maybe the neighbor keeps pigs. So, they slaughter a pig and then they swap some pork for some chicken. They're very, very happy. They don't need, hundreds of thousands of dollars a year to live on. They're rich in their own way. And I think that's something that the West don't see, that these people live very rich lives, although they're not financially rich. They are rich in what they have and their stress-free lives. So it's just very different, the way of thinking about economy here as in the West. It's very different.
I want to add one thing about, have you followed the poverty alleviation, how actually China achieved it? We have the welfare in the West, and actually they pay very, very minimum to people, but just actually, it's like they just want them, okay, we give you a little bit of money, but just, you're in a survival mode, but we pay you to do nothing. In China, it's not like this. China will not give you money to do nothing. What they will do in China, that's what they did. How they lifted up like 800 million people out of poverty, was actually they sent hundreds of thousands of people in the countryside. They analyzed the problem. They gave the tool to people to get out of poverty, and there was a tracking all along. They would go back and forth. How did it work, and so on. And at some point in the villages, people would say, well, you know what? I don't need any more help. Now I'm self-sufficient. And that's what they did. So it's like you're poor, you teach someone to fish, and then he's gonna fish. But you don't give
That's
the.
exactly what I see,
That's what
Angelo,
China
here.
did.
Time after time after time. There's so many projects I've visited where, villages have learned how to grow something or learned how to produce something. I was in Inner Mongolia last weekend, and it was a kind of harvest festival, and they've set up an academy. Now this is like really rural China, Inner Mongolia. This is like way out nowhere. And they've set up this academy because the locals were producing like goods. So they make products out of corn husk. They produce foods, oils, sunflower seeds, many different things. But they were unaware how to use the technology. So they set up a government-funded like center where locals can go and they teach them how to use the technology, how to become live streamers. So then they can sell their products all over China. And this is a total government initiative. And these things are fantastic because now you have locals, they make these products and they know how to sell them, where previously they were not sure how to use the technology to be able to sell, because these are people that are bit older people. They haven't grown up with this technology, so they don't fully understand it. But they have this literal training center where they train people how to do live stream, how to use the technology to sell their goods. And it's like, oh my God, this is just fantastic.
Actually, in Thailand, the Thai monarchy, the previous king, and now under his son currently, they did the exact same thing all over Thailand, especially rural places, unreachable places that just were being neglected, or just because of infrastructure not reaching there. They did the same thing, and they did the same thing where they were building institutes where people could come study for free how to grow different types of food, processing, all different types of technology for processing your agricultural goods, added value, so that if you already are a farmer, you can make more money. And the other thing I wanted to point out is I was reading that book, The Governance of China, where it's a collection of Xi Jinping's speeches. And in it, he talks about poverty alleviation depending entirely on education, training, and hard work. There are no free handouts. And this is the thing that always kills me, is when I'm listening to Americans and they're talking about the welfare state in America and how they're trying to turn it into a communist country like China. It's like China doesn't do that. They demand hard work, and they believe if you want to make more money, go get some training, go to school, learn a skill so that you could do something that is more valuable, so that you could get more money, instead of just demanding you get more money for doing the same thing. And as a matter of fact, that mentality in communist China interlocks much more closely to these conservative Americans who are opposed to the welfare state as it exists in the United States, which is, I think, the welfare state in the US is a disingenuous attempt to address poverty, poor education, doesn't even address poor education. So I just think that's ironic. It's an ironic argument that Americans make, and again, born out of ignorance.
Yeah. So something I picked up by being in China that absolutely blew my mind when I first came around. I'm more used to it now, but the focus that's put on education here is just off the scale compared to anywhere else I've known. And that's not just from a government level, that's from like a parental level. There is and I think China many years ago, it's like, I always compare with India, because if you go back to the 1980s, India and Chinese economies were at a very similar level. And, you look now and China's economy is significantly larger, 5 or 6 times than India's. And I think a lot of that has been down to the drive China, not only the government, but parents of kids here have put to education. I think the literacy rate, I don't know the figures, Angelo possibly got the figures, the literacy rate for, Chinese people compared to Indians now is significantly greater. And I think China realized that education is a key driver in becoming economically successful.
Yeah, actually, I suggested Cyrus did a very good video. Actually, he was done with the help of Kamtan. Kamtan, who's an expert
Oh
on
yeah,
India.
he's a good guy, Twitter
And
guy.
if you check his last video, he talks about the problem that India has. And again, I think it's overrated. When the West says, well, India is going to be to be at the same level of China. I think there are structural problems that India has. I think one of the main problems actually, well, maybe the structure of education, the structure of the economy. There's not in terms of industries and manufacturing, it's still very low, extremely low. And most
Mhm.
important is infrastructure. India is nowhere near China. And and then again, I think India is maybe suffering. It's sad to say, but it's suffering of too much democracy, meaning that
Mhm.
what when you are actually antagonizing each other and you overbuilding a road, and it's going to take 2 generations to build a railway. Uh, that's one of the problems they have. And actually, the West is probably too happy to see India being a democracy which is extremely divided and very unstable. Because it's sometimes democracy can be very unstable. China, the
Mhm.
way China works when it comes to democracy, is actually compromising. They fight to come to a compromise. In the West, they are going to fight. Then at some point, you have the mob rule, 51%, that are going to rule against the 49% at the expense of 49%. In China, it
Mhm.
will not happen. The idea is that we are the majority. Okay, maybe, but you know what? We are going to listen to the minority because we need to work together. It's not the winner take all. And that's one of the problems that India has. And I really suggest people to watch the video of Cyrus Johnson that he made on India. It's an eye opener. Sadly, I just wish the best for India, but I think it's overrated. When they say well, India is going to be as big as China. India has a long way, and especially when it comes to infrastructure. Brian?
I think you're absolutely
Yeah,
right. Go on, Brian.
sorry. Western style democracy. I think that's important to make the
Yeah,
distinction. Western
yeah.
style democracy is dysfunctional. It is not how you administer a country. It's how you divide and control a country. And India suffers from another problem. They have this colonial legacy still hanging over them. They have all of
Mhm.
these ethnic and religious divisions that were created deliberately by the British Empire that still persists to this day, that the West still invests in to perpetuate to this day. They've done the same thing in all of the countries surrounding here. In Thailand, we're all colonized except for Thailand. So they all have the very similar problems. Even Thailand itself was forced to adopt Western style democracy. And I would say Thailand is probably 20 to even 50 years behind where it should be because of Western style democracy, this absurd notion that everyone needs to vote for the prime minister and these parties, which are all just completely chock full of self serving criminals who are not qualified to run anything, let alone a country. And, and so you have all of these factions fighting, even killing each other, bringing their mobs out into the street, literally burning sections of the city down. The U.S. deliberately fueling the entire process, backing certain parties they want to get into power. And what does that do for the whole country, its well-being? The best interests of the actual people living in that country are not being served. They're being undermined. And what is it all for ultimately? It's because they want to transform Thailand into a battering ram against China. They don't want Thailand to develop into the best, most prosperous, most stable country that it could be. And you just look at the travel through Thailand, look at the resources, the human resources, the natural resources in Thailand, the amount of industrialization they've already undertaken, I would say, despite Western style democracy. Imagine if they could shed this system imposed on them from the
Mhm.
other side of the planet and pursue their own system of governance that actually allows them to cater to their best interests rather than going through this cycle
Mhm.
every however many years it is that they have elections.
Yeah. I'd just like to go back to something Angelo mentioned about the sort of India, China, and there's been a lot of talk. Oh, Apple are going to move all their production to India. It's absolute nonsense. I think their target is by 2025, 7% of their production will be in India. And they're even having difficulty with the little bit they've already moved there. And it stems back to, years ago, and it's the same with EVs. China invested in infrastructure within, the Chinese mainland. When I first started coming to China, a lot of goods from made in China would go through Hong Kong. That is significantly less nowadays because China have some of the most advanced modern ports anywhere in the world, like automated massively. But you can't just build a factory in India to manufacture iPhones. In fact, a lot of the iPhone manufacture that's happening in India is actually just assembly. They ship all the component parts from China and they're just assembled in an Indian factory. But you can't just have that factory as a standalone. China has something called supply chain clusters. So when they have different regions in China are known, like for instance, Santo is the area where a lot of toys are made. But they have a massive ecosystem of factories around there. So, for instance, take toy cars, and you'll have one factory that manufactures the wheels, another factory that manufactures the little steel axle, another factory that does the paint, another factory that does something else. So all these factories are within a very small area. So these factories can pull from all these factories to other factories to manufacture the finished goods. So that's the first thing. Then let's say if you have a factory that's manufacturing, 20 million iPhones a month, for example, you have to have the logistics to be able to, one, get the components into the factory, and then two, when those items are completed, you have to have the infrastructure to be able to distribute them all around the world. And India just don't have that, and China do. You can literally get, there's fulfillment warehouses not far from where I am in Dongguan, that you can literally get something anywhere in the world within like 3 or 4 days. A single item. India just don't have that. And that infrastructure, like Angelo says, it's not something you can build and have ready next year. This will take 15 to 20 years for India. Well, it'll probably take India 40 years because how long have they have, was it the Japanese that are working on their high-speed railway? I think it's the Japanese, and it's like years behind where it should be. This brings me to the point that Blinken says in his speech that America are going to team up with India to build a competitor to the Belt and Road. It's like,
what are they calling it this time?
It's like,
what are you smoking, Blinken? Actually, just to mention Apple phone, actually, in reality, all the components are made from China. So what they will do in India would be just assembly. That's all.
Correct,
assembly.
yeah.
So, and actually, there's a heavy subsidized. So basically, they are going to produce at loss. It's just a phase project. It's about gaining phase. That's all.
What Leo is saying is a reality that for some reason it seems no one in Washington, London or Brussels, they don't seem to understand this, and they've gone through now the same process of awakening regarding arms manufacturing. They're like, let's just we can't make enough shells for Ukraine. Just expand production. What's so hard about just double it by next year? And they're like, well, there's explosives that have to go. We have to source the explosives, and then there's the steel, and we don't have enough workers, and you've let education go down the tubes, so we don't actually have anyone who's capable of standing in and no work ethic. So we have no one to stand in the factory, the new part of the factory that we would have to build, which also will take like a year or two to build. And people are like, wow, I didn't realize that manufacturing is that complicated. And just as you were saying, Lee, when you build up manufacturing capacity, it does create an ecosystem, and they all are working off of each other, and that drives costs down. So even, the West is talking about, well, we don't want our manufacturing in China. We're going to move it to India and Vietnam, and we'll make ASEAN the new China of Asia. And, if they could get witless people who came into power, again, because of Western style democracy, to sign on to that, they could get certain things going, but it will take years and years before they can replace this capacity China has if they can. And I would imagine that it will never be as cheap or as efficient as it is in China after they move it out and into all of these different countries. And it's exactly like how they literally cut the Nord Stream 2 pipeline to prevent Germany from getting cheap hydrocarbons from Russia. And now they're saying, we'll give you liquid natural gas. It'll never be as cheap as Russian gas, no matter what they do. And I think the same applies for manufacturing. So it's a pipe dream. It is a pipe dream. What are they smoking? And it all stems from the premise where the West must control the entire planet at all costs. And that's where all of this stems. So if they could just go back to this premise and realize how irrational it is, and just work as a constructive member among all of these other nations, rather than trying to impose itself as it has for generations, I think they could come up with a policy that is sane, will avoid all kinds of wars, and will be better for them. They themselves, even the greediest people, they will find a more sustainable process to make profit from if they just came to this realization.
Yes, Lee. I just want to add one thing. I like to repeat that, but I think it's really important that we are not here like pro-China. It's not about being pro-China. What we are saying is that we see good things in China. People are happy. It's a system that has been delivering. What bothers me the most is the confrontation. We're going against China, and we could work together, and we can actually. One thing really important that we could learn from China. We see many positive things. Why don't we start learning from China? I'm not saying that we should never, it's not about exporting a system, but it's about really, it's about best practice. And I remember, Deng Xiaoping in 1979, when there was the opening up of China and the reforms, he said, it doesn't matter if the cat is black or white, as long as it touches the mouse. So what he did, he went around the world and he saw what were the systems that were delivering, and he took a bit of here, a bit of there, a bit of there. Actually, he was very inspired by the system of Singapore. And I think many actually foundations we find in China come from Singapore. It was very dynamic. Singapore was extremely poor, and they made it, the Switzerland of Asia. And that's what we should be doing. We are so self-centered, we don't actually do self-reflection on what we do, or no results. It's not working. Why would you go into this direction? Let's see, what we can learn from others, and then, put our house together, reorganize our house, get it better, and then see how we can work with China, but not against China. And that's a loser attitude. You know what? When you all the time you're saying, well, China bad, why don't you start working on your house? Wow, we have a special guest. You guys ready? Wow, Alex, what's a nice surprise?
Hey, Alex.
Hey guys, how you doing?
So how you doing? Where are you right now?
I'm at a cafe. I got your message. I jumped into a cafe here outside. I didn't jump into anywhere. I'm sitting outside of a cafe in Budapest. So
Excellent.
I just
Where
thought
you
I would
from?
jump in for a few minutes and just say hello and just chat for a bit. And I hope it's not too noisy. I'm not
No,
sure.
it's perfect.
It's cool. It's fine.
So what
Fine,
we were
okay.
talking about, did you follow a little bit our discussion? We were talking about China, and
China,
basically,
yeah.
China has been learning actually from the world, and they've been doing a system on their own. And what I was saying is that basically, we could actually learn from China, but learn about best practice around the world and do some self-reflection. How we can actually, it's not about from our side saying, well, China is great and so on. It's like there is a system that has been delivering. Why don't we start working on a system on our own and working on our home first? We are trying to export a system that is not working, and back home nobody likes it. You talk to Americans, you talk to Europeans, we are not happy about our system, but we still want to export our democracy, our system. So what is your view on China? How do you see China, and how do you see this confrontation between the West and China?
Gosh, it's a huge question. Look, I think it's coming. I don't want to say it's inevitable, but I think it's on their minds. But I mean their minds, the neocon globalist group. They talk about it all the time now. You notice that the aims of the conflict in Ukraine have definitely shifted. The exact aim of the conflict in Ukraine now is to degrade Russia in order to deter China. You will hear every single leader in the collective West say those exact lines. We need to get money to Ukraine in order to degrade Russia so that we can deter China. So it's shifting. I mean, we're being walked towards it. My belief on a potential conflict with China, I think it's going to be an easy sell in the beginning to the West. I really believe that. Unfortunately, I think it will be, but that's where we're heading towards.
Brian, do you want to jump in?
I think. Yeah, go on, Brian.
Well, I was just going to ask you, how are things there? Do you notice any changes in Budapest, in Hungary?
I came here to see what it's like. We cover Hungary a lot for a small country, a relatively small country, in Europe, in the West, in Eastern Europe. It has a big say in what's going on because it is the one country that is misinterpreted. I don't think everyone says it's pro-Russia or it's aligned with Putin or the Kremlin. That's not the case. It's not the case at all. I mean, I don't want to say that people are antagonistic towards Russians or hate Russians, but this is a very Western influenced place. I mean, you can see it. It's very influenced by the West, but they just don't want to see this conflict continue. I think they realized a long time ago that Ukraine can't win, and the West, Europe, the EU, the United States, they can't win. They can't win against Russia in Russia's backyard. They realized it. They see that it's not going anywhere, and people don't want anything to do with it here. They want this thing to end. Outside of that, a lot of tourists from China. I hear a lot of people speaking Russian, so it could be from Ukraine. It could be Russian tourists as well. But I mean, it's pretty normal. To be quite honest, I would say it's nothing out of the ordinary is going on here. The vibe is pretty normal.
And what about economically? Because I mean, you can't really tell by just walking around, unless something really drastic is taking place. Expensive. More expensive than before.
Yeah, I wasn't prepared for it. Expensive. It really is.
When you managed to find Ely coffee, I just check on your cup. You are coffee addict. That's a good sign. Whenever you're traveling, you know that Ely coffee is a safe bet, right?
Yeah,
exactly. No, I mean it's very it's exactly like you would expect Budapest to be this time of year. A lot of tourists around. Everyone's pretty relaxed. But this place, this country is the one country that stood out amongst all the rest of the European Union. But now you have Slovakia. You have the elections in Slovakia. So from 1, we've gone to 2. That 2 is going to turn to 3. That 3 is going to turn to 4. And when you get back to the conversation on China, the EU is pushing very, very hard to remove member state trade with the Chinese. I mean, they're pushing very, very hard to start to move the European Union away from China. It is absolutely suicidal, but they're pushing it, and they're pushing it very hard.
I have a question, Alex. I'd like to take the advantage that you're here on the show. I follow you guys, and you guys talk a lot about the globalist agenda. But could you give us try to simplify from your perspective? Give us how it works. What is the globalist agenda? How does it work with the World Economic Forum, with the Bilderberg? Is it a project of a destruction of nation state and ultimately to be, to be controlled by largest corporation, the globalist elites? Are we talking, because I mean, you see, we talk very often about countries, but in reality, those people, those globalist elites don't care about countries. Ultimately, what they're doing, they are using countries to fight their wars, but it's a war of hegemony. But ultimately, it's going to be this open society where you'll have everything which will be centralized, controlled by the globalist elites and big corporation. How do you see that? Am I, and would it be correct, the direction where I'm
No,
heading?
you're exactly right. Yeah, I mean, I think you're exactly right. It's globalism for me is neoliberalism, neoliberalism on steroids. I mean, and liberalism. What is neoliberalism? It's the government working with the big multinationals. To me, that's neoliberalism. It's when the big corporations are controlling the government, and the government is working on the behalf of the big corporations, the big global corporations. And I think that's what this group of people who are the globalists, who are the neolibs, who are the neoconservatives, because I think neoliberalism and neoconservatism have just kind of merged into one now. The neoliberals, like someone like Samantha Power or Blinken, who I would say I call them neocons, but it, strictly speaking, they're neolibs. But the difference is very very small now. Someone like Blinken or Samantha Power will say, I'm starting a war with Syria for humanitarian reasons. It's that humanitarian intervention. We're going to rule the world because we know best. We can rule it best. While the neocons are just like, we just want American hegemony. We don't care. We're not going to try to hide it behind a flag or wokeism or anything like that. We're the shining star on the hill, and we're the top dog, and that's how it should be, and that's how it should always remain. So I think that's
And
a slight difference. But to me now, I think they're all globalists. I think neoliberal and neocon is globalist. I try not to get into the details of it all anymore.
yes, I noticed that you guys don't touch much like societal issues. You try to be neutral. My question, how do you see what is this project of a deconstruction? Deconstruction of human being. I mean, I'm talking about gender issues. Now it's bad to love one's country. Now it's to have traditional values, the family. Religion. We want to destroy religion and so on. And I have this impression that it's about deconstructing the human being. And what is behind this? Why do they do this?
Control. I think you said
Control.
it perfectly, Angelo. Control. If you can isolate the person, isolate them, remove them from any connection to country, to faith, to family, completely isolate them, then you've got them. You've got full control over that person.
So they want to turn us into slave labor and just consumers. That's how they see us, but not
Control
but they
us.
don't want.
Control us. Yeah. Control us.
And then people like that, they would never fight in trenches. I mean, basically, you don't fight. You are just a consumer, and that's the problem they have. They need proxies that are willing to fight for them, and they need ideology, like very strong ideology, like Nazis in Ukraine. So they know that those ones are going to be willing to die. But then, with this woke ideology, those people they just don't care. I mean, the first thing, if there's a war, they'll take a plane ticket and they'll go to Bali, right?
Or ISIS in Syria.
Yeah.
They need these groups. They back the nastiest of the nasty groups to fight these proxy wars. But that's who they need. That's who they need to get the job done. It's just the way it goes. But the first chance they get, like going back to something like Syria, they were hoping that ISIS was going to take Damascus. They were close. I remember there was a point during the conflict in Syria where ISIS was 14 or 17 kilometers from Damascus. And I remember covering the story, and I was like, that's it. They're moving in on Damascus. It's over. And Assad was staying put. He was not leaving. Assad was going. If Damascus was going to fall, he was going to fall with the city and with his people. And then the Russians stepped in, and they've never forgiven the Russians for that. They have never forgiven the Russians for that, because they were so close, just like Ukraine. They were so freaking close. They were moving on Crimea after the Maidan in 2014. Nuland had the Nazis. They were making a beeline right towards Crimea. And actually, the people of Crimea stopped them at the borders. They actually fought them off until the Russians could come in and provide the support that was needed. So, they need these groups. They need these groups to fight their dirty wars. But if they were to ever win one of these dirty wars, they'll bury these groups right afterwards. I mean, these Banderites in the west of Ukraine, if they had a chance to win, if they ever were to win, the minute they won, that would be it for them. They would be destroyed, wiped away. But yeah, you got to isolate the individual. That's the key. Make the person, make the man, make the woman be completely 100% alone. If you can accomplish that, then you've got them.
Yeah, it's interesting. We were talking about this just before. Actually, in China, you have people have fun in groups. You have this thing about, okay, well, family, but then today's a national day, but everybody's outside. Nighttime, any night, you go outside in the street and people dance together. They have social activities together. So they look at China as being a society altogether, while in the West, people just stay home and it's focused on the individual, and people just end up just alone. And what do? They watch, they sit on the sofa, they watch porn, they watch Netflix, and they're just on their own. And it's sad. It's not, ultimately it's not about saying, well, one is wrong, one is right, but we Chinese are happy the way they are, and only Chinese can judge on their own condition. I'd like to, Alex just join us here. Do you have any question? I want to take advantage that Alex, Reporterify, do you have any question you want to ask Alex? I want to take the advantage to have Alex Cristofori on the show today. You guys have any question? And also, especially,
I think
we covered China South, and Alex has been more like a focus, more Russia. Maybe we can share like the differences of perception, China and Russia. You have people that actually that understand very well Russia, and then they fall into the same trap of the mainstream media on China. So they say, well, we understand that, there are Nazis in Ukraine and so on, but China, there's a social credit system. There are Uyghurs in concentration camps. It's like, well, you know what? It's like they've been lying us on everything, and people are selective on what they want to believe. And it's easy to say, well, China is bad anyway because they're brainwashed, and they're communist. You have
I think one of the most interesting comments are, and I think a few people can share this. I think even Lee will understand what I'm talking about here, is that when you come to China and you start reporting on China, let's say you're a tourist, you're in Shanghai or you're in Shenzhen, people immediately attack you and say, hey, but what about what's going on in Xinjiang area? Imagine a travel vlogger going to New York and the first thing in his feed is, hey guys, what's going on in Guantanamo Bay? I mean, that's exactly the strange thing about living here in China. It's amazing that it's the first thing that they will attack content creators. I just wanted to mention that because I find it very, very funny that when we change cities here, the first thing will be in our comment section is, well, what about this and what about that?
What about Hong Kong? What about Taiwan? What about Xinjiang? It's always the same thing they repeat again and again, man.
The thing that I wanted to, since we got Alex Cristoforio on the show, and hi Brian and hi Angelo, I'm really focused on this natural gas trade. I tripled down on it last week here, and I really think this is going to get out of hand here pretty soon. The Americans would love nothing more but to see this natural gas really pop here in the next couple of months. And this is really going to hurt Europe. I think if we get nat gas over 4, you're going to be seeing, energy bills like you have never seen. I know Poland actually closed a couple of hotels down last year because they didn't want to pay the electricity bill over the winter season. But have we seen any issues in Europe? Budapest, what a beautiful city. I think it's one of my second favorites in China, in Europe. But have we seen anything, Alex, over there with price increases or anybody moaning about electricity bills yet?
Here in Budapest, I haven't been able to really get a feel for it. I just will say that in general, things are a lot more expensive than I anticipated. Like a lot more expensive than I anticipated. I'm kind of I find that kind of interesting. But I will say this, over the past 2-3 weeks, I don't know if you've been following this, Brian, but over the past 2-3 weeks, we've been seeing a lot of pipelines, especially in the west of Ukraine, on fire, blowing up. Now, there's 2 reasons for that. One reason is that, at least that I could think of, maybe you guys have some other thoughts on this. Maybe the chat has some other thoughts on this. One reason is that Zelensky is kind of sabotaging those pipelines to send a message to the Europeans. That wouldn't be unprecedented. The other reason is that Ukraine just can't maintain these pipelines, and they're just starting to crumble. There's the third reason, which a lot of people say, well, it's Russia. It's Russia sabotaging, but that's ridiculous. If Russia wanted to turn off the gas, they could just, they're not going to sabotage or drone them or anything like that. But those are the reasons I can think of. But and even yesterday, I think there was another pipeline that, and all these pipelines are passing through Ukraine, going to Europe, coming to places like Hungary. So I don't know what's going on. The timing is absolutely spot on. If you want to really put pressure on the European Union, this is the time where you want to start blowing up some gas pipelines. Or perhaps Ukraine they're tapped out. They can't maintain these things. I don't know. Or that's the one thing that I've been noticing, Brian. Yeah.
Or it's a third party, maybe contractors from the U.S. because they want to keep Europe on a short leash, and they're like, look, at any moment we can do this, and we can blame it on anyone. We'll blame it on Russia. We'll say Russia is droning and shooting expensive missiles at their own pipelines, and then you have no gas. So you better continue doubling, tripling, quadrupling down on Project Ukraine. The other thing that is just blowing my mind, I don't know what to make of it, is this deluge of articles about all of these arms factories that are supposedly going to be built in Ukraine, and then I heard the UK say we're going to send troops to Ukraine to train the Ukrainians so we can spare all of our NATO bases.
Yeah, they've quickly backpedaled on that one, though.
Yeah, I mean, like they were testing the water, and they jumped 10 feet in the air. But
the thing is, it was the defense minister Grant Shapps, and then I think the prime minister has come out and says, "Oh, don't take any notes of what he's saying. He's talking delusional," because they realise what a shitstorm it might cause.
But the thing is, I've always said that they could be, thinking about setting up some kind of buffer zone.
Sorry, Brian, go ahead.
Well, I was going to say that I think they would be very tempted to set up a buffer zone in Western Ukraine, and maybe they were thinking of trying to do this with these British troops, thinking that Russia wouldn't dare strike them. Maybe, I don't know. But again, even if they did send troops to Ukraine to train Ukrainians there, and they built these arms factories, this would be years and years before this began having any result on the battlefield, if it ever did.
Sure.
Alex?
Yeah, it's not. It's not. Alex, you wanted to say?
Yeah.
I just want to add, and my natural guest. Go ahead. Go ahead, Alex, and then I'll follow up after you.
No, I was just going to say that. What was I going to say? The whole weapons thing is, first of all, the UK moving in troops to train or moving a ship into the Black Sea warships. That would be exactly what the Russians would want. That would be exactly what the Russians would want. They would be waiting for them to come in. So they better not pull the trigger on that one. I mean, they better not put one warship into the Black Sea. First of all, they have to go through Turkey anyway. So I mean, I don't think that's going to happen. But trainers in Ukraine, remember what the Russians did when there was a big mercenary camp way in the beginning of the conflict? They sent the Kinzhal missile right into that camp, and the 300 or 400 people that were in that camp close to the borders with Poland, they didn't see anything coming. So I mean, I think that plays right into Russia's hand if the UK is going to do that. As far as the weapon stuff, every day now you're seeing stories about weapons factories in Ukraine. They're going to build weapons factories. All these countries are signing deals to build weapons factories. The foreign minister, they had a big event where they brought in something like 30 or 40 MIC companies. The foreign minister of Ukraine said they signed 20 deals. Well, of course, this is a grift. This is a grift. Lockheed Martin, if they wanted to sign a weapons deal to create ammo with the U.S. government, they would go directly to the U.S. government and sign that deal. But what they're doing is they're signing a deal with Ukraine. Ukraine, where's Ukraine going to pay? How is Ukraine going to pay for this deal with Lockheed Martin? And I'm just saying Lockheed Martin. I don't know if they actually signed this deal. The money comes from the U.S. So the U.S. gives Zelensky the money. Zelensky then gives the money to Lockheed Martin. Everyone gets their cut. Whether Lockheed creates a tank factory or not, who cares? The money's budgeted. It's made it through the House. It's made it through the Senate. It's all there. It's appropriated. Lockheed can build its factory wherever it wants in the future, Ukraine or no Ukraine. And everyone's washed their money because it's all going through Ukraine. It's all going through Ukraine. This has been the racket for the past 10 plus years, 15 years. Ukraine has been one big washing machine for all of the globalist elite and for everyone in the U.S. government. That's why they're flipping out that they can't get more money into Ukraine. This whole government shutdown thing. Because it's like they're saying, how am I going to get my money? It's like they're paying themselves. I want $24 billion to be given to Ukraine because that money's going to come back to me. That's what Lindsey Graham is saying. That's what McConnell's saying. That's what the military-industrial complex companies are saying. They're like, come on, let's get this approved so I can get my cut. It's been going on for forever. This is Ukraine. This is what Ukraine has been doing forever, is this corruption. And Putin came in and he ruined their game. He ruined their game. Before the SMO, no one really knew how much money was swishing and swooshing around Ukraine. No one really knew. But there was money going. I remember it when they went into the Cyprus banks and they shut down the Cyprus banks and they took the money from the Cyprus banks, 10 billion. That's all we needed, 10 billion to keep those banks open. The EU said no. 6 months later, they gave 20 billion to Ukraine. Not even in the EU. So, you know, this whole weapons thing, in my opinion, Brian, I see this as just a way to just wash money through Ukraine. And yeah, maybe they'll build weapons as the contract is going to outline, but I don't really think it matters. I don't think the MIC companies are hell-bent on building a factory in Lviv. They'll be just fine building those weapons in, I don't know, in Berlin or wherever, or Poland. I mean, I don't think they really care. Just make sure the contract's signed, it's all approved. Let me get the money to the senators and the congressmen as well, and the EU Parliament members, and we're all good. Sorry, Alex. That's all I wanted to say.
Alex, you wanted to join? You want to?
So I think I was either on with. Yeah, sure. Can you hear me? Okay.
Yeah.
Uh-huh.
Can you hear me? Okay, guys.
Yes, we can hear you.
Yeah.
Okay. So I don't know if I was on Brian. I don't know if I was on Brian or I was with the Duran on this one when I was talking about the natural gas. The reason why I'm harping on this is because in the derivatives market, this is what I've been trading for 2 decades now. Again on Thursday and again on Friday, these derivatives increased. Now, just to give you guys a ballpark figure on the derivatives market on the natural gas, look it up. I'll read it to you, okay? How big is the derivatives market? Derivatives national amounts increased the first quarter of 2023 to 26.6 trillion, or a 13% increase to 217.6 trillion in derivatives contracts. That's how much money is on the line here. And number one player in all of that is natural gas. 217.6 trillion in derivatives. Those are backed up, basically insurance policies being sold against whether it's oil and gas positions, natural gas positions. I'm telling you guys, this is going to be a firecracker here in the next 90 to 120 days, because most of the market perception, if you're trying to do some forecasting, most of it's played out in the derivatives market. Just to let you know where the derivatives market is located. It's located in Chicago at the CME, the Chicago Mercantile Exchange, much different than Wall Street. These are the boys that are in the bullpen screaming and yelling at each other, trading contracts, flicking their fingers back and forth, signaling each other. Most of it is done, open I guess it would call open market trading, where a lot of it's not done on the books electronically first. Okay, so it's kind of like, all right, we need 5 or 10. The guy writes it in his book and then he enters it into the ledger. All hell will break loose on this, I think, here in the next 90 to 120 days if these fires continue, as Alex and Brian have noticed to some of these pipelines. But if we see a shortage come, there's a 25% increase in these natural gas markets. And this is, to me, this has the potential to disrupt everything. I mean, absolutely everything. And, I don't normally bring it up until it hits a threshold of about 15% backed, but now we're seeing 33% of all natural gas contracts are backed worldwide. And that works out to be about $14 trillion in securities is what somebody's backing that up. So that's a lot of money. Yeah. I just want you guys to keep an eye on it. Let's see how much fun they have with that market, because if it gets over $3 or $4, then it's going to be chaos. I don't know how the Europeans are going to be able to heat their homes this winter if that's what it gets to. Because remember, last year there was supply still in there, and the Americans were still supplying the Europeans. They were bringing these tankers, but Russia's been selling it to China now. China's been taking the bulk of it. So unless these storage tanks are full and there's lots of stuff on the way, and remember, they're forecasting on what the costs of these are. And I mean, if it's coming in at 8 or 10, you're going to see electricity bills go up 200, 300, 400, 500%. And I'm not being unrealistic there. I mean, it's going to be shocking on in the natural gas field. Anyway, that's my 2 cents on it. I think that's where another war is going to be played out in, definitely the derivatives market.
I'd like to jump in here. We tend to, especially for the EU, we tend to oversimplify the cost of the war. We tend to say, well, there's 100 billions of weapons that we ship to Ukraine, and that's it. In reality, the cost for Europe is so much bigger. Just a few points. Reconstruction, let's say for whatever is remaining of Ukraine, reconstruction is going to cost $1 trillion. It's going to be money laundering. Okay, what's one cost? Deindustrialization of Europe and especially Germany. What is that cost? How How can you put a
Massive.
figure on that? It's going to be 20 years of lost business. They lost Russia as a market. So basically, they don't have access to Russia. Okay. Now the cost of inflation over a period, because you are going to spend much more money on your gas and oil. What is the cost over a period of 20 years? Now the threshold, everybody's going to be at the 2%. They need to get to the 2% of defense spending for the next 20 years, because they'll be pushed. So there's going to be extra spending. And then de-dollarization and the loss of status for the euro. And additional to that, the isolation of Europe. Just think, I mean, the cost is probably $10 trillion. And people, they are stuck on the $100 billion. No, it's way more than that. It's so much bigger. And the cost of refugees and the cost of insecurity. We have all those Nazis that are going to be the next ISIS that we'll have to endure here in Europe. They might turn against us. Remember what Zelensky said. One day those people are going to be very angry, and maybe they might turn against us. So you see the cost is enormous, and nobody's talking about this.
So I have to disagree with you, Angelo, on everything you've said. The actual facts are that for 3% of the U.S.'s military spending, they've destroyed 50% of the Russian army. It's a great deal.
That
Check your
video
facts
is
better
just
next time,
insane.
Angelo.
I just can't believe somebody actually produced that and thought it was a good idea. You know, it just tells you the state of the US, man. That's just mind blowing that they produced that.
You're talking about that commercial where
Yeah.
they're basically saying they're advertising, they're promoting war in Ukraine. It's killing tens of thousands of Ukrainians to deter China from what? From existing, apparently.
Yeah, it's just
Within its
just
borders.
Unbelievable. I think something else as well. Angelo mentioned inflation, and what a lot of people don't realise is inflation is actually compound. So when you hear
Yes.
like food inflation in the UK, I think is currently running at about 18 or 19%. But that's 18 or 19% on last year's like 15%. You know, it's compound, and a lot of people just don't get that. You know, I was back in the UK in May, and I was absolutely shocked at how much, especially food, had got. It's just crazy. I have my daughter and son-in-law. He's a sergeant in the police, and my daughter's a healthcare worker. They have one young child who's 2.5. So they're on above average salaries. Now, previous, 18 months ago, they'd probably go out at least once a week to eat. Now, they're going out like once a month to eat because things have got that expensive. You know, their mortgage has increased by like £300 a month. Their electricity bills are £1,000 a year more. It's another £100 a month. Their grocery bill. In fact, my son-in-law says, we added another £50 a month to our grocery bill at Christmas and at New Year, and it's not enough. You know, and they're buying the same as they were just 12 months ago. You know, all these people are experiencing. I think you'll get to see that the people, I think personally, will start to rebel against the amount of money that's being sent to Ukraine when so many normal people are kind of struggling to pay their mortgage, pay for their food, you know, and be able to sort of have spare income to enjoy themselves. I think it'll ultimately end up with new governments in a lot of these European countries.
You know, Angelo, you brought up an interesting point. The way you're seeing things with inflation and the actual cost of this conflict in Ukraine, it's really interesting. And we go back to your question about globalists and neoliberals and neocons. The neocons, they just don't think like that. you know, they never think, and Alexander brings this up all the time. The neocons, when they're strategizing their wars and they've got the chessboard and they're saying, we're going to take this country on and that country on, and we're going to destroy this country, they never think in terms of economics, in terms of natural gas, in terms of oil price. It just doesn't enter their brains. And it's true when you read like the neocon articles that they put out, they never think in those dimensions. For them, it's just about, we're good, you're bad, we're gonna do whatever we need to do to regime change you. We'll support whoever we need to in order to regime change you, and that's that. They never think about how is this going to affect the markets, how is this going to affect energy, inflation, prices, what's going to be the cost to the US. For them, there is no cost. There never is a cost. Iraq WMDs, no cost. Libya, no cost. Syria, no cost. But no one ever holds them to account either. I
think that's partly though because I think that's partly though because they up until recently, and it's now starting to change, where the dollar has been the world reserve currency. So they've pretty much been able to do all that free of charge, like you say, no cost. But that's starting to change now. And I think as the dollar's use decreases, I mean, I asked the question, right? The US government, and maybe Alex, you can answer this one. The US government deficit is huge and it's growing. You know, their debt is just going kind of exponential. Who is buying all their bonds to pay for all that? Because certainly from what I've seen, a lot of the foreign buyers, the big buyers, used to be China, Japan. They're not buying anywhere near what they were. Even Saudi Arabia are not buying. So who's buying all this debt? You know.
Yeah. Well. Can I jump in just to answer to what Alex just said before? Maybe that's the plan to get people bankrupt. You see, people are going to be, they are going to, once the economy crashes, they are going to they go, those hedge funds, BlackRock and so on, will have opportunities to buy distressed assets. It's the same as the subprime. Subprime created opportunities for those globalist elites. You buy distressed assets. So tomorrow, if the economy crashes and people cannot, afford their homes, what do? You have BlackRock. They have deep pocket. They buy distressed assets. The same as they bought land in Ukraine. I do think that sometimes actually, when you make the market crash, for that is opportunities for those hedge funds. They buy low. That's what they're waiting. That's part of maybe of the plan of you will own nothing and you will be happy. You will have no more own home in the US. You will have just people renting and on a survival mode, because that's the plan. You see that those waves of refugees that we have in Europe, and again, I'm not against it. It's not anything racist and so on, but the plan behind this is to have like slave labor that comes into Europe to put pressure on wages, and already workers in Europe are suffering, and you have people that are willing to work at a lower wage, and you make the globalist elites happier. It's like, now you want to keep your job. Well, you were silent before. Now you are going to be working more and for less.
Although I would say at the end of the day, it's more of a tropism than some sort of
I'm not sure if
deep
question was
I think Alex has a major delay, but
yeah.
I think it's a bit of a tropism, because yes,
right,
they're going to take advantage of all of these situations as they crop up. But when you look at the vector sum over all of the decades, you can see the West is in serious decline. If they had some big diabolical plan, I don't think they would be in this position that they're in. They're in a position that they want to improve, but they cannot, vis-a-vis Russia, China, emerging multipolarism. And so I think a lot of this that we see taking advantage of refugees, driving their own populations into poverty, pitting them against each other over these wedge issues. This is just something that they just do as part of their nature to try to survive and kick the can down the road. But I'm skeptical that it is some big plan, because if they had a big plan, I don't think they would be in such a desperate situation versus Russia, and then an even more desperate situation versus China.
How do you see that, Alex? This illegal
if possible, I
immigrants issue.
can chat. I know.
We have a delay with I was going to ask for, I mean, just Alex, Christopher, this refugee.
Can I?
Yeah, go ahead.
Okay.
Okay. Let me ask the question, Alex. You know this refugee issue in Europe, especially in Europe, in the US too. But in reality, it is something planned. Those NGOs are actually going all the way to Africa and actually chartering. They're doing human trafficking. And what makes me dubious, skeptical, is that those NGOs are actually funded by the EU. And so they say, on one side, they say this is illegal, but on the other side, they are actually chartering, that they are the one complicit of doing this human trafficking. What's the plan behind this?
I think it's a very complex situation with the refugees. My opinion on this, and I think you can argue it in multiple ways and different sides. But I think if you can cut off the funding of the NGOs while at the same time stopping the wars,
yeah,
and even Putin was talking about this in his speech yesterday, where he was talking to the leaders of Latin America about the predatory system that now exists. If you can make a system that's more equal, where business is done on an equal level, like say Niger actually does get to sell its uranium at a price that is fair, instead of France buying it at pennies and selling it for hundreds of euros. If you can do these two things, starve out the money from these NGOs, which aren't really NGOs. They're not really there for humanitarian reasons. Let's be straight up. Maybe some people there go and work for these NGOs because they really do want to help. They really do feel like they want to help people in need. But the actual NGOs and these organizations, they're not there to help people or society. I think that we all know that. But if you can do that while at the same time preventing the conflicts and destruction of these countries, then you have the problem solved. But on the European side of things, you get back to once again the question that I think you threw out there, Angelo, when I jumped on, which is, Europe, the collective West is, in general, it is a part of the world that is dying out, and it's dying out because these globalists have removed the family structure, the connection to country, the connection to religion. So I mean, it's someone says in I think actually Schultz said it when he says, look, we on the one hand, yeah, okay, the refugees, but if we don't have people migrating into Germany, how are we going to pay pensions? How are we going to run things? I mean, it's a complex issue, but if you get to the heart of it, if you really want to solve the migration of refugees, I think those are the two things that need to be done. But then I think you put the West in an interesting position, because if you don't have this big migration, well, then the globalists are going to have to do what? They're going to have to promote families. They're going to have to promote population growth. They're going to have to do something. I don't know what that is, but that's what they're going to have to do, because the systems won't survive. So, I think it's a simple way of looking at it, but that's my feeling on the refugee issue.
All right, guys, we are close to hitting a 2 hours mark, much more than what we were planning. But maybe if you one by one, have a last words, where can we find your channel? Maybe we can start with Lee, then Brian, then Alex Reporterfy, and Alex Christopher. Lee, where can we find your channel? Can you do you have any last words?
Yeah, you can find my channel on YouTube at Barrett YT. I kind of mix my content up a little bit about sort of seeing China, a bit of geopolitics, a bit of tech. I just think that, my sort of thought is that I think as time goes on, we're seeing I think we're living in a very interesting time, and we're witnessing history that the world is changing from a unipolar world to a multipolar world. How much kicking and screaming the US will do during that transition, but I think there'll come a point where they're gonna finally have to realize that things have changed, and unless they sort of start being a bit more cooperative, they're just going to become more and more isolated. But I just worry about how far they will go before that happens. I personally don't think China will be provoked into anything conflict over Taiwan, but I just wonder how far the US will go. That's my thoughts on it.
All right, Brian.
You can find my work on YouTube. Just search the New Atlas and then look in the video description of every video. You can find all the other places to find and follow my work. And I kind of see it the same way as Lee. The West has painted themselves into a corner, and they only have the most desperate of options to get themselves out without, again, going back to their premise where they are the global hegemon and they should control everything. Unless they can go back to that premise and rework it to something more logical and more appropriate for the way things actually are on planet Earth, then they only have these most desperate options left to them. And I also share Lee's concern that they might exercise some of those options. And thanks, Angelo, for organizing this. And it's great to share the screen with everyone that managed to join.
Then Alex, Reporterfy, any last words? Where can we find your channel?
Sure, just Reportify. Thanks, everybody. Thanks, Lee, Brian, Alex, and Angelo. I think I'm going to answer Lee's question. I think it was, who's buying all this debt?
Yeah, that'd be interesting.
We used to have 5-year, 7-year, 10-year mortgages. Now we have 20, 30, 40-year term mortgages now. But it's the derivatives market. Basically, the Americans print, and the banks say, okay, we'll buy this. So it starts with the printing machine. The bank says, okay, we'll buy, I don't know, 10 billion Citibank or 100 billion, whatever hedge fund. Now, when the banks go in to do a stress test, or when the government, the Fed, or whether it's the European Union, you'll hear them talk about this, the EC banks. They'll go in and they'll say, yeah, we did stress tests on all these banks. Everything's fine. They will go in and they'll say, okay, you've bought all this debt. What have you got backing it up? And they'll say, this word that I keep harping about is, we have derivatives on it. Everything is fine. Everything is great. We have, $217 trillion in derivatives on this. So basically, I call it BS insurance policies, because we saw what happened in the housing crisis when they called in the CD notes that would back up a lot of these mortgage-backed securities. There was nothing there. Everybody just said, okay, I'm broke. I'm done. We're done. Can't honor it. Take the keys. We're done. And that's why you see a lot of guys walking out of these buildings with their banker boxes. $217 trillion in derivatives. That's who's buying it. It's phony. It's pumped up. Peter Schiff says it right all the time. It's a dog and pony show. The Fed goes on tour to raise cash. Anyway, guys, keep an eye on the natural gas market. Thanks.
Thank you, Alex. Alex, where can we find you? I don't know. I think most of my followers are following your channel, but if you have, where can we find you? And last words.
Yeah, you could find us on all the platforms, all the video platforms. My channel, Alexander McCurse's channel, and the Duran. And look for us on Twitter as well. We're starting to get very active on Twitter. I'm following you, Angelo. I'm following you as well, Brian. And yeah, just go out, enjoy yourself, try to connect with people. Try to not be so stressed about things. Leave the stress to us. Leave the stress to everyone on this panel. We'll absorb the stress.
I was hoping you were talking to me.
No, we'll digest it. We'll digest it and try to present it to everyone that's watching in a way that's easier to handle, easier to take. But get out and enjoy your life and just be relaxed. Everything's going to work out. It always does.
Great last words. Well, again, thank you very much. This is a fantastic panel. Thanks for coming to my channel. And well, maybe we'll do this again next time. Thank you.